In this video, I'm going to show you how to make... In this video, I'm going to show you how to... In this video, I'm going to show you how to make an on-air sign so you don't get interrupted when you're creating your own videos. Well, I guess those please be quiet signs that we have posted outside the labs aren't working very well. So this is the right time to create some kind of a sign that has a little bit more impact, might grab some people's attention. So when I think about that, like an on-air sign or a recording sign, I think a lot about what I would have seen when I was a kid on TV. You know, if it was on a radio station, it would be a lit up sign over top of the door, or outside of some kind of a production facility, there would be, you know, an on-air sign. Kind of Art Deco-y, kind of looking, rounded corners, maybe in a rectangle, quite a thick frame. Obviously red letters on maybe a contrasting background. So when I kind of think about how we should build that, I think the best tool that we could use would be obviously an inlay tool, so that I could somehow put some letters into some pockets on the front of the sign. Now I like to have this backlit so that the lights or the letters will light up when we're actually recording in the labs. And so in order to do that, I'm going to need to have some space behind these letters so that I can put some LED lights. And in order to do that, I need to suspend these probably acrylic letters inside of this frame. And in order to do that, I'm going to need to use some sort of an inlay. And the inlay toolpath, fortunately, that we have built into our software will allow us to do that with a really neat feature. So let me show you how we can actually create the letters and hang them inside of an MDF frame. So to start off with, we've got VCarve desktop open. I'm going to create a brand new file. Now, when it comes to this job, it's going to be a multi-material job. Right now, it's going to be two different materials. It's going to be MDF and the acrylic that we're going to use. And I think we'll probably be using a piece of translucent or frosted clear acrylic. That way we can choose what color we want by just selecting the right color from the LED strips we're going to put inside of it. We'll probably use red, but for right now it doesn't matter as long as the light comes through. And we'll probably paint the front of the MDF black. That way it will give a nice contrast. So this first sheet will be the MDF, which will be our female part of our inlay, okay? So it's going to be a single-sided job. It's going to be the width of about 16 by 8. That seems to be about the right size this thing should be. It should be quite substantial because it needs to be, needs to look, obviously people need to notice it, and it needs to look quite nice. So I think that'll be good. The MDF that I happen to have is quite a thin MDF. It's a 0.30 something or another. And once I convert that to inches, it's about 1.26 inches thick. We're going to zero off the top of our material once we get it down on our machine bed. Our datum will be set to the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to use a very high modeling resolution. Not that it matters in this case because we won't be using any 3D content, but my computer can handle it, so we're going to go ahead and use that. I'm going to choose a material, and it's going to be MDF because that'll give me a nice visual representation of what this thing might look like for this particular sheet, and then we can click OK. So the first thing we're going to need to have is some text. And again, thinking about what I kind of remember from my past, it's nice, bold text. So we'll go into our text tool, and we're going to choose the text. We'll type it in here, on air. And this could be any text, keep in mind. It doesn't need to be on air. It could be recording. It could be a person's name. It really doesn't matter in the end, but for this particular example, it's going to be on air. We're going to make it bold. We're going to have the center, text line to be centered. I only do that because if I want to add another line to it or I want to edit it, then everything will kind of keep justified to the center. And the height looks pretty good for the job space that we have set up. There's only one little thing I see that I don't like very much, is that the kerning is a bit off. The space between the O and the N is nice and wide, but when you look at the bottom of the A here, it's a little bit tight. So if I hold down my Shift key and I click in between there, then I can move it out a little bit just to kind of give it enough space. So I'm kind of balancing out the space between the A and the R with the the A and the I with the I and the R. That way they kind of look decent, and this space kind of looks pretty close to what's there. So I'm pretty happy with that, and we can close this down now. Now let's align this to the center of our job. So we're going to our alignment tool and we'll select align to center of job and we'll close this down. And that looks great. The next thing we're going to want to do is probably create a border for this, because this is, remember, this is a frame that needs to hold our acrylic letters. So let's go to our 3D view. And right away you'll see that our modeling plane or our zero plane has that MDF kind of texture or material look about it, so it looks really kind of neat. We can draw in a quick rectangle. It doesn't matter what size it is at the moment, because as soon as we draw a rectangle, any random size, you'll notice that the bottom field is now selected there where it says 14.45. We can go ahead now and type in what we'd like this to be. So in this case, we are going to make it 13 inches. Okay, and press tab. And we're going to make this 4 inches tall. And press tab. Oh, that seems a bit small. So we can go back and we can correct that. We can make this 6. I think it's probably better. And enter. There we go. Perfect. And you'll see that we have a radiused corner on that. Well, we can change that radius by just dragging this handle right here. But I don't mind the 1/2 inch radius. I think, again, that kind of gives that Art Deco-y kind of look. And it just kind of gives it a nice sort of non-sharp edge, which is kind of nice. So let's click close. And then we are going to center this now again, or align this to our center of our job. And now we have everything that we need for the female part of our job, which in this case, we're going to pocket right through our material. Now, before we go much farther, we may as well go ahead and have a look at our inlay toolpath to see what other things we might need to consider before we get going too far. So let's jump over our toolpaths tab and take a look at that inlay toolpath. And you'll see that we have quite a few options here. Well, I say quite a few in that there's 4 here, but you can mix and match these any order you'd like. The only thing that I want you to remember is that we typically say that you should use the same tool to cut your female parts and your male parts. Okay, that way they fit together nicely. In my case, because I'm going to be using different materials, I'm going to use a different tool for the acrylic and a different tool for the MDF. But the trick is that the diameter of the tool is exactly the same. So the toolpath should match within a little bit, and we'll have to adjust that later on. But I'll show you how to do that then. So we have 2 options for our male inlay. We can have straight sides, and we can also have a stepped side. Okay, we have 2 options for our female inlay again. We can have, or the female pocket, we can have a pocket toolpath, which is something that we're not going to cut all the way through the material, but there'll be a bit of backing left behind. Or we're going to actually cut a hole right through, which in our case, let's remember that, because that's going to be important for our particular inlay that we're going to create. So if we think about it, we want to create a sort of a frame to hold our text. And if we created a regular straight walled inlay, then those letters would actually probably pop right out the front. Or if we used a regular pocket for the female part of this, the light wouldn't shine through the back because there's going to be material in the way. So we're going to want to use a stepped male inlay with a whole female inlay. That way we can push our letters from the back in through the front, and because it's stepped, it's going to leave a little bit of a lip behind so that the letters won't fall out the front of our sign. And I think that's going to be perfect for our setup here. So now that we know that, we're going to need to have a copy of our text. So let's close this down for right now. Let's not do anything with this. We'll go back to our 2D view for a sec, and we're going to grab our text and we're going to right click on that, and we're going to say copy to a new sheet. Okay. That's great. We have 2 sheets. They don't need to be the same size, because I don't want to waste a bunch of acrylic with all that extra space around it. So let's go to our Sheets tab for a moment, and we'll pin this down so that it'll stay there for us. So sheet 1 is going to be our MDF. So let's just quickly go ahead and rename that. So if we slow click on sheet 1, we can now go ahead and rename this with MDF. That's great. Press enter. And now if we have a look at sheet number 2, let's select that. If we double click on that, we'll highlight that sheet and we'll be brought right to it. We'll again slow click on that again, and we can type in acrylic. acrylic, that's perfect. And we want to change now the actual size of this piece of material. So let's select that and we're going to choose edit. Now if we had done that from our design tab and changed our job setup, then all of the sheets would have changed to be the same size. And we don't want that, we want different size sheets. So in this case we want it to be 13 by 4. That looks good. And the thickness of this is going to be, well, I only have a millimeters dimension, so I'm going to put in 5 millimeters, and I'm going to multiply that by I, which will tell the software to convert that into inches for me. So if I press equals, you'll see that it's 0.19685, which is great. We're going to zero off the top of our material. All this is exactly the same except for our material settings. What we'll change this to is something that's going to look a little closer again to what we're going to want. So we're going to use a solid color, and we'll change that color to red just to be fun, because hopefully our sign will light up in red. And then we can click OK. Now with that text selected, let's go back to our design tab for a minute and let's align that to the center of our job. Now I can also press F9 if I wanted to, and it would do exactly the same thing. And let's close this down. Now we have pretty much all that we need. We have our 2 sheets, we have our MDF, and we've got our acrylic. We're ready to go now. So let's create the parts that we need for this inlay. So let's grab the text on the acrylic sheet. Let's go back into our inlay toolpath, and we're going to create our stepped edged male part. So we'll click there. Start depth is going to be at the at the top of our material. Sorry. Our cut depth is going to be all the way through. I can just type in Z in there, or Z, just to be sure that if I change my material thickness, it will and I recalculate my toolpath, it'll update properly. That's great. We're going to use a special tool called an O-flute tool, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on when we're at the CNC machine. But it's sort of a specialized tool that works really well for cutting acrylic. And now we need to tell it what the step looks like. So this is where we want to do a little bit of thinking. If we want our, well in our case, the acrylic is slightly thicker than our MDF, so we could literally have our the face of our acrylic stick out prouder than our MDF if we want to. That might look kind of nice. And then we just need to make sure we have enough material left for our step so that it's substantial, so that it won't break off. And I do know from my experience with acrylic that it's pretty rigid, and so I can have a pretty thin piece back there and everything will be okay. So in this case, I want to make my step depth a little bit more than the thickness of my MDF, so 0.15 I think will be perfect. And then the step width, I'm going to make it 1/4 inch, which is the diameter of my tool, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that'll make it so that all of my letters get connected up in the 2 words, so that I don't have any floating letters. You might want the floating letters, so you could reduce the step if you want to, but I think that for me it'd be best if we had 2 words that I could then work with. We're not going to use any allowance here. This is where I won't in this part, but when I actually create the female part of this job, I may add a bit of an allowance. I'm not going to cut a test part. Hopefully Rebecca didn't hear that, but I'm just going to, because it's going to be so fast to cut, if something goes wrong, then I can just flop off my MDF and put a new piece on there and everything will be, I can just recut it again with the allowance there. So I'm not going to worry about that right now, but if I did cut a test part, then I'd know what that would be, but I don't. So we're going to leave this at 0 for right now. But even if I was, let's get to the point, I would add my allowance to the MDF part, not the acrylic bits, okay? So we'll leave that at 0. We're going to add in some tabs, and with tabs, with acrylic, this is just a top tip for you. They don't need to be all that thick because they're hard to cut, and they're going to be very sharp, so watch out for your fingers. So I think 1/4 inch length is good. A thickness of 0.025 is probably adequate. And then we can go ahead and edit our tabs. Now we're going to want to make sure that we keep all of our letters in the acrylic. So we're going to go with, okay, so as soon as I clicked on that text, I've got a warning. And it says that I need to ungroup this text, or do I want to ungroup this text so I can add tabs? So I can't add tabs when it's actually a text element. It needs to be converted to curves. So that's fine. Let's just say yes. Now I'm going to add in a tab here, which is great. We'll add in a tab here. I'm just going to add them to all the letters, just in case I need them in there. And we'll click close, and then we'll just calculate that and we'll see what we get. So let's preview that visible toolpath and we'll see what we have. And you'll see that that is perfect. A part of my tab here with my eye isn't going to work out. So, but that's really not going to matter in this particular example, mainly because it's going to be in behind or in the back of my sign. I'm not going to see it anyway, so I could leave that tab there if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. I'm going to reset my preview and I'm going to close this down, go back into that toolpath for a sec, edit those tabs. I'm going to remove that one and this one, and I'm going to add an extra tab here. I'm going to get rid of this one and add one over there. And now let's try that and see what happens. Let's recalculate our toolpath and let's preview that toolpath and we'll see what we get. Those are in a much better spot. Now, another thing you're going to want to check is any parts that are going to float around. You'll see the center of my O is going to just fly away. I know that I'm going to be fixturing this down with double-sided tape, so that's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to stay right where it is, so I'm happy with that. And my tool gets in between all of my letters, so that is perfect. Everything looks exactly right. The thickness of my step looks good, and my tabs are nice and thin, as I said. So I'm happy with that as it is, so we can close that down. Now we need to go back to our 2D view again and have a look at the MDF sheet that we're going to be working at. So let's go ahead and click on that. And we'll select our text, and we'll go back into our toolpath tab again. Now, one of the things that's really nice about this toolpath is that it takes into account the geometry of your tool. So, and we'll see it really quite obviously here in a second that our letters are going to be rounded. You may have noticed that before, but because we're using the same diameter tool, then both our acrylic parts and my MDF will be radius the same amount. So they still should fit together okay. And you'll see that hopefully once we can put this all together. So we're going to create our whole pocket now. And we are going to use a start depth of 0. We're going to go all the way through our material, which is going to be Z. We're going to use a 1/4 inch end mill. In this case, I'm going to use a down cut end mill. I want to make sure that the back of my MDF the front of my MDF is nice and clean. The back can be all kind of fuzzy. It's not a big deal. Now again, if I was going to create a test part, then I might play around with my allowance a bit. So what I'm going to do in my case is I'm going to try and test fit in my acrylic while it's still on the machine. And luckily I've got some letters here that are symmetrical, so I can do that to make sure everything fits. And if I have to, I'll just recut this toolpath really quick with the allowance, because I don't know what that is. But definitely a test part would be your main game here if you want to do that. We're going to add in some tabs. This is important because with these tabs, we want to make sure that we don't lose the centers of our letters. We're going to need those later on. So let's edit our tabs, and we're going to try and put one in again. And you'll see we're going to get this error, not error, but a warning saying that, do you want to convert these to curves for us? So we can add in tabs, and I'm going to say yes. So we're going to add a tab here and one there. Now I'm adding tabs across from each other because I want those to be connected together. Okay. That's fine. I want to make sure I get the A in there right, and I'll make sure I get my R center in there right. And we'll close that down, and let's have a look at everything. Everything else looks great. Let's calculate that toolpath, and you'll see right away, see the rounding of the letters that's going on there? That's going to be exactly the same as our acrylic letters are. And if we show our vectors, you'll see that there's our letter here. There's a letter N, especially you can see it there where we're going to cut off that pointy corner of the inside of the N there and give it a round profile. If you don't like the way that's going to look, then I highly suggest you go back and maybe try a smaller cutter, a different font. That might give you a more precise letter if you're going to do this. So that looks okay, I think. And let's preview those visible toolpaths and see what we have. That looks great. You'll see that my O is now going to be held in place. My R center, my A center is good. The only thing that I'm kind of worried about is these big chunks right here in the N. They could fly out and hurt somebody, or they may not be sucked up by my dust extraction. These little ones will, I think. So I think I'm going to go back and close this down. We'll go into our toolpath for a minute. We're going to edit our tabs. And you'll see as soon as I do that, we're brought right to our 2D view. We can't add tabs in the 3D view at the moment. So go over to our 2D view. I'm going to add a tab in here and one down here. Okay, I should grab those islands that are going to be created. Let's close that down. Let's recalculate that. Let's reset our preview, and let's preview those visible toolpaths. And there we have it. Now those little bits of N will be held in place and won't fly away. We don't need them, but at least they won't be dangerous anyway. But we do need to keep the O the center of the A and the center of the R. That looks great. The next thing you're going to want to do is grab this outside vector, and we're just going to do a very basic sort of profile cut of that. Start depth of 0, we're going to go down Z, so the thickness of our material. We'll use that same end mill again outside the line. We need to add in some tabs, so we edit some tabs, and we're just going to put one here and one there for now. Just hold it in place, close that down, and that all looks great. So let's calculate that, and we'll preview that visible toolpath, and there we have it. That looks okay. So I think that we have the two parts that we need right now to go over to the machine. I've got my MDF and I've got my acrylic here ready to go. So let's go ahead and set that up. For the cutter for the acrylic, I'm using this O-flute cutter. Now, this is what has been recommended, and we've used it a few times now, and it's done a really nice job. But what you're going to want to do is really make sure that your feeds and speeds are set up properly for it. You don't want to melt your acrylic to your bit, so make sure that you get those feeds and speeds set up properly from either your machine tool provider or the actual bit provider. It's up to you. I'm also going to use double-sided tape, as we normally do, to stick our acrylic down. And when it comes to cutting the MDF that we're going to do, I'm going to be using a down cut spiral end mill, and that's on purpose because I want the rough edge to be on the inside of my actual box that we're going to assemble this all in. And to secure this down, we're just using straight up screws. So let's start off by cutting the acrylic, and then we'll cut the MDF, and we'll test fit it all together. And if it fits, then we can move on happily. Okay, so there we go. I'm really happy with the way the acrylic cut. It cut really nicely. I did use two different bits for each material, so that's not a perfect scenario. I had to go back in and cut the actual female part a couple times, just a little bit of an allowance so that it made the holes a bit bigger, but everything is good right now. So there's the center for the O in on. I'm just going to fit that right in there. It fits really nice. And then I can go ahead now and just simply go ahead and fit in the on letters. Now that worked really great. I'm really happy with that. So let's go ahead now and have a look at the finished file that I've made to finish up this on-air sign. So as you can see, we have multiple sheets inside this file like we talked before. We've got, not only do we have our MDF sheet, but also our acrylic sheet. And then we're going to create the actual box or frame this is going to fit into out of some pine that I've purchased and have ready to go. So let's just go ahead and quickly look over this file. So the sheet called Pine Number 1. Now this is my original layout. So once I had my text laid out and I had that original box for the MDF, this rectangle right here drawn up, and I tested out my inlay, then I could use that to derive the rest of my job from. So what I have is this frame. So this will be the frame, and this is the front of it. Now I'm going to cut the face of this box from the back side. That way I can add in a slight lip that the MDF will actually push into. So if you look at my tooling over here, there's a toolpath called lip plus allowance. I've added a little bit of allowance to this lip here, so that's going to be slightly wider. And then I have my cutout path. So let's flip over to our 3D view for a second, and we'll just quickly have a look at those toolpath previews. So let's preview this one first, which is going to be the lip. Okay, and you'll see there's the lip right there. And if we take a look at the toolpath, you'll see that I have a pocket allowance of minus 0.01, so it's going to be slightly bigger. Hopefully that'll make it so that my MDF will fit in there perfectly. So let's close that down. And then my cutout toolpath is pretty much standard. I did add some tabs in there. Nothing special about this. And we'll calculate that, and we can preview that visible toolpath, and we'll see what we end up with. That's exactly what I want. So you can see there's that lip right there. I'm gonna have a nice substantial sort of rectangular piece in the middle. Not to worry, I'm not gonna waste any of this stuff. We'll use it for other jobs, but that will be the face of our actual box. And you'll see it from this side when we assemble everything together. Let's go back to our 2D view for a second and let's look at the next part of our frame. So if we're going to need to glue this up. So the next bit is going to be sort of just a ring of pine, but because of the LED strip that I purchased that fits inside of this, I'm going to need a space at the bottom so that the receiver is visible to the remote control that I have. Now, depending on if you create this project, once you purchase your LED light strip that goes inside this, you're going to need to figure this bit out on your own for whatever it fits yours. Maybe you're going to plug this in. Then again, if it's going to go into your regular mains or your regular house or office power supply, then you're going to need to sort of figure that out. But for me, I just needed to pocket down a little section here so I could bring out the receiver and then and bring the wire back in again and then continue to glue in or stick in the LEDs. So if we take a look at that, there's a quick little pocket toolpath, which is this bit right there, and then a profile toolpath. So we go to our 3D view and we preview those visible toolpaths. You'll see that what we get. So I needed to leave this little piece right there so there was something that I could actually stick the receiver to. So hopefully some double-sided tape will work and we shouldn't have any issues at all. Back to our 2D view for a second. The next layer we have is going to be this layer here. And these little lumps are here because I want something to be able to screw my back into. Yeah, so because I want to be able to get in and out of it if, let's say, the LED strip falls or something goes wrong inside, I need to be able to get access to that. So these little lumps will allow me to actually screw on the back or have some material there for the screws. And this is a very, very basic profile toolpath, nothing special about this, with some tabs in there. So if we preview that toolpath, there's nothing fancy. It's pretty easy. That looks pretty decent right there. That's great. Just close this down. And let's go back to our 2D view and we'll take a look at the back of this. Now, my idea here was that I wanted to countersink these screw holes or the heads of the screws. This might be a bit aggressive, but you, again, depending on how you want to put this together, you might want to change these. But for me, I think they'll work fine. Seeing as I don't have a chance to test this out, so I'm just going to give it a go. So if we go to our 3D view and we preview all those toolpaths, you'll see what we're going to end up having. We have to make sure we turn all our toolpaths on before we do that. And you'll see here that we're going to have these little countersink areas. And that's a 1/4 inch diameter hole, which is a bit much, but my screws are going to be long enough that it's not going to matter. I might use some washers. But certainly I think probably you can do if you have a smaller bit or you want to do a bit change, and you can. My idea was I didn't want to change any bits. I want to use the same bit in the same setup to cut all this pine with. So I was kind of limited to that. But that's it. So I have all the bits to make my frame. The next thing is to take a look at my MDF part of my frame. Now, as I mentioned, I didn't cut a test part to see if I had needed to add any allowance to this part of the job. But after I have cut it and so on, I've decided that I needed to add some in here. So if you take a look at my toolpath here, you'll see that there's a bit of an allowance here. And that would make it so that those acrylic letters fit in there nice and tight. So that's where that allowance goes. In my job, you can choose again to put it on this part or on your acrylic, or you can do a little bit on both, whatever you want to do, it's up to you. But this was my choice for that. So we're going to close that down. So again, we're going to be using 3 different kinds of materials, and we have 6 different sheets here to deal with in our software. So there we have it. I think we have all the parts that we need to make our on-air sign. So I've got some material already cut up here to the right length, and I'm going to walk over to the CNC machine where I have a little jig set up, which is really going to help me a lot when it comes to cutting this sort of repetition of parts. So I'll be able to put down my first board. I'll be able to do my X and my Y and my Z. These are all the same thickness, so that's going to be great. Once this part is done cutting, I can take it off. I can swap in a new board. I can go ahead and start my next part cutting, and then I can go over to the sander and take care of this part. So I have a nice little sort of system going here, so it'll make things go super efficient, and I'll be able to get through these parts really fast, I hope. So let's go ahead and get that started. Well, I really enjoyed making that and showing you how to use the stepped inlay option in the inlay toolpath. We're going to have this with us at Workbench Con, so if you happen to be going there this year, why don't you stop by and have a look at it. Hope you liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments or any questions, please leave them below and I'll get them as soon as I can. If you haven't followed us, please do subscribe to our channel. And until next time, let's hope you don't get interrupted making your next video.